If you ask me if I exist, I think the only reasonable answer to that would be, I don't know. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, guarantees me that the universe hasn't started a second ago and all my memories have been generated at that same moment.
But you see what the problem is, and I want you to just when you go home, or just think about even right now, all this knowledge that you have is leaving you with zero. And that, you know you exist, I know you exist, but when you start thinking about all this stuff, it's like, well, I don't even know if I exist. Come on, man. You know you exist, man. Your reason, you have reason. Maybe you don't know how to put reason on a paper and draw it on a map, but you know there's something inside of you that tells you God exists. It tells you exist, but because you're filling your mind with all of these thoughts, you're trying to figure out God. It's like me trying to figure out how I use a cell phone. I don't know.
If you think about the definition of truth, for example, the definition of truth is basically the same definition as God. Because, for example,
so you believe in God?
In a certain
there
way,
you go,
if you're
man.
saying like that, yes.
You started out as an atheist, now you believe in God. Hallelujah.
Christ's forgiveness of
Christ's forgiveness.
Christ's forgiveness.
Christ's forgiveness ministry.
How Christ's forgiveness ministry.
So, I'd like to hear what you have to say to me. I'd like to hear arguments towards your faith, and maybe try to convince me about my lack of thereof.
Sure. What I would say is this. The reason why I believe God exists is the same reason why you would believe you exist. You believe you exist because of experience. Or humans exist because of experience. You experience them. You can see them. You can touch them. And I can say that billions of people in the world have experiences with God. Now, how do I know that your experience is a reality? And how do you know my experience, or the billions of people that believe in God for some reason? They believe in God. How do you know their experience is real? Well, you have to test the experiences, right? Well, how do you test your experience? Well, you can put it under a microscope. But how do you know what you're seeing is real? So that means there's meaning behind the experiences that you see. Where do you get meaning? From shared knowledge or passed down knowledge. But how do we know that knowledge is even right and wrong? Well, ultimately, everything boils down to faith. And how do we get faith? Well, faith comes from an inherent, or we could say it's inherent. It's within us. It's just the way we are. We exist this way, and life means this because we experience this. This is just a part of our biological, physiological makeup. Or we can say, well, wherever we got this biological, physiological makeup came from the source of what brought us into existence. Now, whatever that source is, developed us a certain way for a certain purpose and has a certain meaning behind it. So whatever that thing is that brought us all into being, made us this way, to experience things this way, has a meaning this way. For instance, when you feel that urge, that means to go to the washroom. There's a meaning behind it. When you feel like something has to excrete, there's a meaning behind it. You can't switch the meaning and say, well, that really means I'm hungry, when it really means excrete yourself, right? There's a meaning behind everything, right? So this meaning comes from ultimately a source of knowledge, passed down knowledge, inherent knowledge, but the originator's DNA and the originator's meaning and purpose that he put behind all of creation. So that's why the most logical thing to deduce is that there is a belief in some higher power. So, does that make any sense?
Yeah, it did. I follow you, but I'd like to present another point. So, from what I heard from your earlier argument, you say that it doesn't make sense for things to be random, correct?
Based on my understanding of logic.
Okay, but I'll try to be clear about that.
Because logic depends on absolutes, right? You understand that, right?
Yeah, sure. But there's two things I'd like to state about that. Because, for example, mathematics. Mathematics is a system that deals in absolutes. 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 2 is 4, and so on. But, you can't really point somewhere and say, oh, there's a 1. You can't, numbers don't actually exist, they're constants.
Now you're getting where I'm getting, meaning and faith.
Exactly. So like, numbers don't actually exist. They're concepts that we created based on our senses in order to be able to interpret the world around us.
100%.
Exactly, because or else things wouldn't make sense.
Exactly.
We do need to make so as things are readable to us.
And why did we come up with a number?
So, I personally, I believe that numbers and concepts such as emotions are partly from our inherent biological makeup and partly from culture. But what I'm trying to say,
Pause there before you go on. You're right. I love where you're going with this. And the interesting thing is that these concepts and these things that we make like numbers, the reason why we come out with these things is because there is a certain inherent passed down, or rather a certain knowledge that was passed down somehow, or inherent, which makes life work and understandable this way versus that way. So in a sense, we're very mathematical. Good. Now you can continue.
all right, so about this mathematics and stuff, I think we'll both agree that the universe is infinite, right? Or if not infinite, at least immeasurably big.
I agree. I don't know the size. I haven't traveled the universe, but
It's impossible to know the exact size, but the point is the universe is, you know?
Yeah.
Sure. So the universe is way too big for us to comprehend. The concepts of all the space and all the time that exist are way too big. So going back to the point of randomness, in a space and in time, there are, if not infinite, immeasurably big. It is reasonable to say that most possibilities, as small as they may be, will eventually happen, right?
I can't say that for certain because of. But one thing I can say is that, however this universe existed, has a meaning and a purpose to it. That's all I can say, based on my experience, based on what I know, based on rationality, right? So even if I were to say that this experience might work or not work, the reason why I say I can't say for certain is some things actually will never work, and some things will always work. And it's the meaning we put behind the experiences can change. I can say that I can put a new meaning on what a car means. I can say a car is really a boat, but it's never going to be as effective as a boat as it would a car. So we're only working with a certain amount of I forgot the name for it. A certain amount of materials in this universe. So there's a limited amount of matter. There's a limited amount of things you can do. So if I had to take that matter and construct certain things a certain way, it would be limited. Creation is limited. Everything finite decays, right? So there's certain limitations to it. So at the end of the day, whoever made finite matter or matter in itself had a purpose behind it, and it's just the way it is, and that's why things are the way it is. That's why we know what we know, and we do what we do, and whatever that was is obviously stronger than the pebble we see on the road, stronger than me and you, and has the capability or the potential to be rational, logical, and life-giving.
So,
Hold on one second. I never seen you in a while. One second.
So, on the matter of matter being finite, there being a certain amount of matter, I think there's another point of view about that too. Because the same way that you were talking about decay, all the matter that does exist, all the things that make me and you and everything around us, have in fact always existed since the beginning of time, as long as
That's a theory.
yeah, as far as we know, at least.
Well, I would say that they all. Thank you. I would say that they all came into being from an originator, a creator, right? And everything, even most credible theories of evolution point to an originator. So even if you said they always exist, most credible theorists in science say that there was an originator.
So about the originator, from what I believe I learned, evolution to a certain extent also takes a bit of basis on the theory that matter a long time ago arranges itself in a certain way that would eventually lead to life. But this wasn't a deliberate, how can I say, it isn't that it was intentional, but it was caused by the present laws and the present ways that things can work based on the fundamental laws of the universe, and eventually came to be through a series of events that took a very long time and were all compounding over each other.
Well, the thing behind that is that depends on motion. And if everything is moving, movement means that there's a source. So if the source behind things give movement to something for whatever reason that ends up moving with other chemicals and producing what we know as life, that movement had some kind of coding or some kind of purpose inside of it, and purpose doesn't just come arbitrarily. Purpose comes from a source. So no matter which way you spin it, no matter what you call God, maybe you don't call God the Muslim God or the Buddhist God or whatever, but there still is a power, a higher power that brought everything to be.
Okay, I think I follow you. I do believe that there are larger laws and larger powers than ourselves, but I can't really grasp the concept on how those forces and laws and powers are deliberate or conscious or, actually have intention behind them. Because, responding to why, because, for example, if I see a windmill that is spinning, well, I know that the wind is spinning the windmill. And the wind came from somewhere.
Came from the shifts in the earth.
Exactly, it came from shifts in the earth, it came from one of the currents.
Of the earth.
Exactly. But
So there's a source behind it.
there's a source behind it, but I can't understand the reason why that source would be something deliberate with intention.
Because you don't know the reason why the originator made the earth the way it is, the waves the way they are. I mean, why do we even need water? Why do we need oceans? I mean, the creator made things for a reason, and they're all interconnected. You can't do without the other. It's like a tree depends upon our oxygen, or we depend upon the release of, I believe it's the oxygen, and then we give the carbon dioxide or something like that. So there's a reason and an interconnection for life to exist. So all of life has an order and a structure. Even the law depends on a lawgiver. There is no such thing as a law without a lawgiver. There's no such thing as justice without a judge. Like, all of these concepts are based logically on the idea that there's an originator. Even to talk about origins of this species, there's something behind it. So it's the most logical thing to deduce that there is a God. It's the most logical thing.
On a matter of logic, a God by definition is a force higher and incomprehensibly more powerful and a lot bigger than anything, correct? So, how can we safely...
That's the meaning you attach to it, but yeah, it's fair.
Okay, so based on that, if a God is a force larger and stronger and bigger than anything, I don't think it would be logical to assume that it follows logic in itself, because it's bigger than what we can comprehend, and logic is a result of our comprehension.
Well, let's just make it simple and put it into you. You're a human being, and based on your existence, you can argue that, well, I don't just do things based on logic. I do things just randomly. But that's not true. You do things based on your impulses and what you're feeling and what you need for the moment, right? And from the creation order that you're in, I mean, I would say that you're a higher evolved species. Well, if I use the terms evolved, you're higher than the lizard and you're higher than that in some senses of some sort, right? So you being the highest form of life on this planet, you do things based with purpose and meaning. Now, there's no reason to think that someone with the ability to be rational or logical wouldn't do things with purpose and meaning. I mean, we can argue back and forth about that, but it would be more safer or more logical to deduce that whatever brought things into being, even if we don't understand it and comprehend it, because there's laws of things that we still don't understand. I still don't understand personally how we can take a cell phone and call someone, and I don't understand that. So whatever laws exist, there's meaning and purpose behind it, and that seems to be the most logical. And talking about theories, I could say that's probably a more logical theory to hold on to than the opposite, because the opposite is that there is no meaning behind whatever God does, and then that would make us question, well then, why do we exist? If there's no meaning behind anything God does and everything's just random, well then, why do we have law and order? Why do we have ambulances trying to help the sick? Why does everybody that I know care about the homeless and women and children in front of war? Why does that grieve us? Because there's meaning. Right?
Well,
Praise the Lord.
all right. So I think I got some really good stuff out of this. Thank you. But like, I believe that probably our beliefs or lack of thereof on some things, maybe they come fundamentally from a different approach to things. But
I think we're coming to our beliefs through the same sources. You're coming to your beliefs through what you learned, your experience. Remember, I started off with you know you exist, or I know exist because of experience. So your experiences have brought a certain belief system into your mind.
So about knowing that we exist, I have a different approach from, for example, the other guy that was here earlier. If you ask me if I exist, I think the only reasonable answer to that would be, I don't know. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, guarantees me that the universe hasn't started a second ago and all my memories have been generated at that same moment. But it is not reasonable to me to act around this supposition because, well, there's also a way to prove that it happened either.
But you see what the problem is, and I want you to just when you go home or just think about even right now, all this knowledge that you have is leaving you with zero. And that, you know you exist, I know you exist, but when you start thinking about all this stuff, it's like, well, I don't even know if I exist. Come on, man. You know you exist, man. Your reason, you have reason. Maybe you don't know how to put reason on a paper and draw it on a map, but you know there's something inside of you that tells you God exists, it tells you you exist, but because you're filling your mind with all of these thoughts and you're trying to figure out God. It's like me trying to figure out how I use a cell phone. I don't know. And if I were to sit around, like maybe if we didn't have the technology that we have today, which took many years to develop, I'd probably be like, you know what? It's just a mystery. Maybe it's magic. I don't know. But there was actually a principle that I didn't understand. And there's a principle that you don't understand. And there's nothing wrong with saying that there's something greater than me that I don't fully understand. But the little that I understand points to the fact that that thing exists. And I'm content with that. And the more I learn and tap into and dig into this thing that's bigger than me, the more I learn, the more I grow, and the more my life works in an orderly way. And that comes with a theistic worldview. Make sense?
It does. I'll think about it. I'm not fully convinced, but you gave me some very good things to think about. And actually, one thing that I read about some time ago is that if you think about the definition of truth, for example, the definition of truth is basically the same definition as God. Because, for example,
So you believe in God?
in a certain
There
way,
you go,
if you say it
man.
like that, yes.
You started
Because-
out as an atheist, now you believe in God.
But
Hallelujah.
the thing is, I'm not sure. I can't be absolutely sure if
You're not sure because you don't know everything, but
Exactly.
you are sure, based on what you know, you're sure enough that truth exists, and you're sure enough that a higher power exists, or something bigger than you exists. You're sure enough on what you know.
But for me, and I think that's the difference in approach, I think that my being sure is an absolute. Because, for example, we can say that truth exists.
Yeah.
Right, because if I ask you, does truth exist? If you tell me that, yes, it does exist, well, it does. If you tell me that it doesn't, I can ask you, well, if you're saying me the truth doesn't exist,
But that leads to
are you saying the truth? And that's the
Exactly.
paradox.
Exactly.
Secondly, truth must have always existed. Because if you ask me, was there a moment where there wasn't truth? You can say yes on the same logic. Because a moment that has no truth cannot exist. Because if you ask if it existed and you say no, then you go to the same trap. And also, truth must be absolute, or in another sense, binary. Either things are true or not. You can't be half true, you can be half false. So, based on these suppositions, we can all apply the same principles to the concept of God, correct? So, what I do believe, and what I am fairly sure of in my limited capabilities, is that while people have different conceptions and different meanings for higher powers and universal laws, I think that fundamentally, everyone that does have faith on higher
Stop
power.
there. Stop there. Pause for 1 second.
Okay.
Because the meanings that someone attaches to reality doesn't mean they're equal or that the meaning they attach is true.
Exactly. And that's why when we do attach meaning to things, the message can get distorted because meanings depend on individual experiences, depends on culture, depends on circumstance. But some things don't depend on circumstance. For example, the existence of truth, or rather, the incapability of truth to not exist. Well, I don't think we can absolutely ascertain that something does exist. We can say that things don't.
So this is why there needs to be an authority behind meanings, like a dictionary behind the English language. And the authority that we have is the Bible.
I see. Well, one of the hardest things that I have about grasping religion are exactly Holy Scriptures. Because there is wisdom to them, because they're, by definition, a set of rules and a set of principles in which societies and individuals can base themselves around, correct?
Right.
So these principles, these beliefs, they are very malleable sometimes. They change over time. And some things that may make sense for a society at a certain point in history may not make sense after that society has gone through enough changes.
I would say that the principles of these Holy Scriptures don't change. The circumstances which those principles are applied changes. So you are right in that sense, but the principles are the same. I mean, loving your neighbor, thou shalt not kill, not steal. In every religion, every society, they're the same. And if they're the same, that means they're most likely absolutely true. And if they're absolutely true, it points to the truth of whoever brought those laws into, or those principles into existence. And that means that that person has a character. If that person's character is stable, then we can deduce certain things and come up with the right belief system of how to apply and live our life.
Okay. Can you hold it for me?
Yeah, thanks, it's cool.
Yeah.
So, I don't think I fully agree with that because, for example, I think that probably the reason why so many different belief systems, religions, and philosophies follow similar principles, for example, not being violent, or respecting the concepts of compassion and solidarity and being helpful to the community around you, I do believe that those should be simply common conclusions based on observations around the nature of things. Yeah. For example, if you look at very different cultures from around the world, most cultures you can get like from places in the east of Asia to South America, and all peoples have, for example, the bow and arrow. Pyramids are structures present all over the world because they're the most effective way to stack stone and stuff. So some conclusions come naturally because similar circumstances lead them to be discovered.
Right, and those conclusions, I believe there's a couple of ways. The reason why we have Holy Scripture is not that the way that we should live is simply only because Holy Scripture says so. It's because it's what works for human nature. So anyone can reach these conclusions. In fact, if you go to the beginning, from what I believe is the origin of humanity, from the Garden of Perfection, or what we call that, the Garden of Eden, mankind was more in tune with how they should live based on being closer to their creator, their originator. And as time went by, due to making the wrong choices, they've made conclusions that don't line up with how they used to conclude about things before. So the creator brought people that reminded them of these conclusions that they forgot. I think we're forgetting a lot of things that we should normally conclude. It could be because of genetic disease. It could be because of mental disease. It could be just because of hardening our hearts from what we know is right. Like, why do we pass by the poor guy when we should be helping the poor guy? Why do we do that? Because we're selfish. We're conditioned to be selfish. But the natural conclusion on the inside is that we don't preach hate, we preach love, but you preach hate because you don't love me. But the natural conclusion that we should do, we should help them, but we choose not to. So, yes, we can all conclude similar principles, but sometimes we need a reminder of what those principles are because we have a tendency to forget. So that's why we have prophets who come and say, hey, come back to the principle of life. You're forgetting what life's all about. That's why we have preachers like me saying, hey, come back. Now you might say, well, why do we need preachers like me? Why do we need religion at all? Well, think about it. Every society on this planet is overtly religious. That means there must be a reason why everybody's religious. Even though we have so much technology, we're still religious. And what makes religious people still gain an influence and gain a following? Why are you even talking to me? Because there's something about what I'm saying that's reminding you of something that's intrinsic to your nature, but sometimes we can forget. And so religion is essential to the survival of humankind because they're principles that we ought to live by, but we don't. Because we get distracted by everything around us for some weird reason. So that's what makes spirituality so important to your life and to mine. And that's why God is so important. The belief in a God. Societies that don't believe in God always end up falling apart. Look what happened with communist Germany, which went through a big split and went through its problems, or Russia or China. People are revolting. It doesn't work. Cuba. Every society that was atheistic always fell apart. But the countries that were theistic had some order, some principle, and an authority behind the law, which keeps governance, which keeps structure, which keeps humankind going on. So, why is it like this? I don't know. It just is. It's just the way we were made. We were made religious.
While I do agree with you that we do need some fundamental principles to follow, I believe that it's more a matter of having faith in a philosophy rather than necessarily a religion. For example, Buddhism isn't necessarily a religion. It can be a philosophy, it can be a approach to life. And through these principles, people guide themselves in order to better themselves, in order to lead a happier and more fulfilling existence. And you did make some very good points, but I don't think we're gonna really get to the same page.
Can I stop you on one thing? The philosophy. What turns philosophy into spirituality is philosophy can be more theoretical, but what makes those philosophical points something worth living by is if it works and it's a reality. So these principles that we think about, the reason why we live by them is because they work and they prove itself to be true. And if it proves itself to work and to be true, and if truth can be equated with God, then these principles is what governs all of life. So it's not just a philosophy, it's a reality. Life works this way. And if we don't do it this way, life falls apart. So no matter which way you spin it, there is a higher philosophy. So the highest philosophy is what we need to thrive for, which is why people always debate about how to govern a country. They're basically arguing about what's the greatest principles that make society work, right? So if you go by the highest philosophy, that's what you need to live by. The highest philosophy is a belief in God, because when you compare all the other philosophies, they don't match up, and they don't line up with logic. So the highest philosophy is belief in God, and I would argue and challenge anybody to prove to me that it's not the Christian way of thinking. Because the Christian way of thinking is behind most of the greatest institutions on earth. The hospital systems, the prison systems, the reform systems, even the countries that seem to thrive the most are based on a Judeo-Christian principle. This forgiveness principle that we have, this idea of sacrifice, missionary work is all based on this idea of Jesus Christ going out and reaching out to the lost, redeeming the poor, the loving your neighbor as yourself principle. This is the ethic of Christianity, and it's not the ethic of Islam, it's not the ethic of Buddhism, because if you go to Buddhist and Hindu backgrounds and countries, they believe on a system of reincarnation and karma. So if your karma is bad, there is no real reason why you should help someone suffering from their bad karma, because you're interfering with their bad karma.
So, some people in my family are actually Buddhists, and I don't know if maybe it's a different school of Buddhism, but what I learned about karma, of the concept of karma, is that good and bad karma, they're not a sum. Whatever, in the concept, from what I understand, whatever good you do eventually comes back to you, and whatever bad you do comes back to you. But the good that you do doesn't take away the bad, or vice versa. So the action of helping someone that's going through something bad it wouldn't be a bad thing because this person is suffering, because this person will suffer independently of what you do, because it's the consequences of their own actions.
What you need to do is look into societies dominated by those worldviews. And when you look into places in India and China and other Buddhist countries, and look at the overall principles that govern their society, you will see what I'm talking about. It's not that I don't agree with you. I think that anybody that does good will get good karma, and bad, you do bad karma. But there's a whole framework behind that system, and when you look at all the countries that are governed by that system, it falls apart. So why is it falling apart, and why is the Christian worldview, or the Christian principles, or the countries with Christian principles, the countries that everybody wants to live in and finds it more just and fair, is because there's a truth. It's the highest philosophy. That's why it's dominating. So it's not because I'm just making this up. There's a reason why, without a sword, Christianity dominated and conquered all of Rome. But it's also a reason why, within the first 100 years, Islam conquered with a sword. Different philosophy, different worldview.
I think I know where you're coming from, but I think I'll have to disagree because, for one, I do believe that philosophies and religions, their fundamentals, their concepts are usually for the greater good. But the application of these concepts is a little bit trickier because, for example, lots of very bad things have been done in the name of Christianity in history. There was the Inquisition, there were the Crusades. And while I do agree to some extent that Christianity has provided a framework for some of the systems and for some of the institutions like hospitals and stuff, it did. It is true. But it came from a very long way of mistakes being done by people who were trying to follow these principles in their own conception, but failing to do so. So I don't think that the fact that some, for example, what you said, some cultures with different religions, such as Buddhism or Islam, some of these countries, they're falling apart, they're having problems, but it may not be necessarily because their concept is flawed, but rather because the execution is flawed.
Well, you want to be, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're trying to be politically correct and liberalize everything, but let's face it, not all philosophies are equal. There are some bad philosophies. Now, you're right, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. Maybe the application is wrong, just like there has been some bad moments in Christian history, right? But if you just par to par Christianity, put the original all beside different philosophies, even atheism and theism, put them all side by side, there's some philosophies, some worldviews that rise to the top over another. And I would choose the one that works best rather than the one that works less, because the one that works less, that means that there's flaws in it, that means it's false. I can write it off all the way. Even if it's 89% true, and there's one that's 99% true, I would say that the other one has to be false because it doesn't line up with what the highest philosophy we know. So if I were to say, how should Canada be governed, if there's something that's 99% true versus 89% true, I would pick the 99% true because it would bring the best good in the country rather than the 89. So I would say scrap that one, we have a better one. It's just like you have Toyota Model 1 or iPhone Model 10. Well, that's arbitrary because, because the iPhone, I have iPhone 7 and iPhone 10 and I can't tell the difference. Actually, I like the iPhone 7 because it's smaller. God bless you. But you know my point. You scrap the older model for the new. We don't play Nintendo Entertainment System, even though some people do. You play PlayStation 4, Xbox, right? Yeah. Better graphics, right? So, but anyway, man, I gotta go to prayer, man.
Yeah.
Hey, good talk, man. I love that. That's the way we should talk.
Yeah, man, really good talk. And while we don't agree on everything, you made some very good points. I'm happy we had this conversation. And I hope that the next people that come to talk to you are not as confrontational, because that was a very good conversation. Yeah. Keep fighting for what you believe in, man. Yeah, Thanks.
All right. Where are you from, man? Costa Rica?
Brazil.
Brazil. Okay, I heard the accent, man. I know a lot of people from Costa Rica, man. So, all the best, man. All right. Do we still have time for prayer? Hey, God bless you.
I think it's over.
Is it?
I would just stop it, okay?
Yeah.